Hello and welcome to Pellicar. That's my sandbox, my world building forever project. If you've just stumbled across this video, check out Dresden's Tale, a soap opera style fantasy adventure, the reason this station exists. If you just want to hear my thoughts on naming stuff, that's okay too. Personally, I've found it's something that can be a real headache. It can slow down a project, stymie progress, and ruin morale. It even fuels an entire baby name book industry. This is going to be a short episode, so I'm not going to make you suffer through the whole intro. Let's just say you can trust me on this stuff. My name is Lewis Nichols, and I'm older than most of you, so listen up. I've been involved in gaming for many decades now, and young me would be apeshit happy about all the cool things I've done through these years. Oh, and I'm humble. Don't forget the humbleness. Seriously though, if you've done any kind of world building in your life, I know you've had rough moments where you just can't think of the right name. Maybe it's an NPC or some character in a story. Maybe it's a town, a river, maybe it's a whole nation. It could be a type of beast or some fantastic force of nature wholly unique to your world. Well, let me tell you, you're going to keep having these problems even after watching this, but maybe I can make it just a little bit less painful. Now let's start with a couple of general ideas. Keep it relatable. If you want to create a fun and meaningful experience for your audience, you can't throw unpronounceable names out and expect them to be embraced. Even if you want to invest in something strange for a payoff later, give them an out. Hello, Pete. This is Samakuda Marasama. He's a persisticant. Pete looked at the four-legged beast, thinking it looked very much like a horse. Okay then, Sam the horse. Good to meet you. So what possible reason would there be for using Sama Kuma Manarata whatever the persisticant? Well, there could be a payoff. Maybe we find out that Kant means nuclear bomb in the ancient language, and later in the third act there's this amazing sacrificial charge of persisticants against the evil Empire's undefeatable army. Point is, you can do some really weird stuff, as long as Sam the horse gets you through most of the story. So don't forget, things can have more than one name. It's happened throughout our history, hence Byzantium and Constantinople, or San Francisco and San Fran, for that matter, New York and the Big Apple. Our final premise before really getting into things is the knowledge that things will grow on you over time. It might sound a little silly at first, but odds are these things are going to grow on you. You might even get used to Sama Kuma Mappa Sabasama and call him by name every single time. You might even, in real life, start coming to think of horses as persisticants and imagine them exploding into nuclear fireballs every time you pass one on the highway. There's a big reason not to avoid naming things early on. That is, giving the process time to take hold. If you avoid throwing out tentative names, you avoid the issue entirely. But if you give something a bad name, even if you know it's bad, it either gives it time to grow on you, or lets it evolve into something cool as you work. Alright, let's get into it. First, let's talk about place names. This is it. You're staring down at the map. You've got some dots on the coasts and others near rivers. Your mind can see the trade routes delivering ore from the mountains to the farming communities on the plains. Little inked towers represent forts and choke points. You have forests, swamps, deserts. This is your grand opus. Your greatest adventures are going to happen right here before your eyes. And then panic. How will you ever name everything? Don't panic. You force your mind into action. The Great Dry Desert. The city of Mekopolis. The Bay of Waves. Oh, game over, dude. This is impossible. Shape up, ragamuffin. This is an opportunity. Not only are you freaking out over nothing, you can use place names to add layers of coolness you haven't even thought about yet. Alright, let's throw in some steps to make this easy. We'll call the first one Step 1. Naming conventions. Have you ever noticed place names often share traits? Have you ever heard of Hamburg, Nuremberg, Oldenburg? How about San Diego, San Fernando, and San Vicente? Let's decide that even though all your characters speak English, or whatever your native language might be, that they aren't really speaking English. I bet their language has a name for city, like Polis, or San, or Berg. In my current setting, the prefix is Parn, hence Parncilia, Parn Etwine, Parn Fastille, and a few others. In the next step, we're going to call Step 2, People Names. Do you know your historical figures? Time to make up a few if you don't. Back in the day, there may have been a King Joe, so there must be a Joe City, Joe Falls, or Joe Peaks. Don't forget the great prophet of the sea god. His name was Albert, hence Port Albert, the Straits of Albert, and Albert Sea. This is also a way to mix up ethnicity. Maybe 500 years ago, the region was inhabited by a bunch of folks whose language was closer to Spanish. A lot of places got renamed, but you'll still have Alejandro's Ridge, or the Ignacia Reef, and the city of Mateo. Maybe somewhere along the way, that last one got morphed into Parn Mateo, because when it comes to names, strange things will happen. Step 3, Cultural Appropriation. We've touched on it, but let's feel it up to its whole potential. If you want to come up with your own languages, or even just small chunks of them, good on you. Some people love it, and that's fine. I'm not really into it, so I tend to travel the pillage and plunder route. When I'm working on a region, I decide on a real-world comparison for language. That doesn't mean they speak Finnish or Persian. It does mean their languages are in the same ballpark. Spoiler alert, this is a great way for coming up for people names too, but it works for places as well. At some point, I decided the mirror language for my main project was German. Big surprise. That's why the station is called Dresden's Tale. A few hundred years ago, one of the powerful historical powers spoke something more like Finnish. So Keld equals German, Old Keld equals Finnish. So, do I fully invest in this robbery? No, but it's one more tool for the box. Do I just copy names from European maps onto my own? Once again, no, but they do serve as inspiration. Step 4, Traits. No matter the language, a lot of places are named because of some geographical trait. Now, for some reason, this seems to be primarily true for smaller communities, but you can do the same thing for big cities too. I give you my permission. What am I talking about? Willow Springs, Mountain View, Poplar Bluff, Blue Ridge, Elk City, and so on. This can include function too. I try to avoid pop culture references, but King's Landing from Game of Thrones is a great city name and demonstrates the payoff for knowing your history. Peace City, Prosperity Shores, Liberation Road are all examples of places that might have been named for an event. Pro tip, combine 3 and 4. If you know your own word for mountain, sprinkle it in with some appropriate place names along the way. Some with religious names, creature types, or anything important to the region. Step 5. Weird stuff. Obviously, this can mean a lot of different things. One of the things it means for me is the city of Sormeal. Circa 1987, I decided I wanted my PCs to find a MacGuffin it was rumored to be in the city of Sormeal. Problem was, that name is a linguistic oddity that translates into hundreds of languages, all convenient meanings to being a place name. In one language, it means gentle river, in another, defensible mountain, and a third, great port. So there are lots of towns and cities named Sormeal. Ever since, most every map I draw has one. For you, weird can mean what you want it to. Maybe you have a dominant religion, so lots of your cities worldwide are named after those deities. Maybe your significant other's name is Sam, and using their name is how you include them in your hobby. Hence, Samsville, Sambron Mountains, Sam the Horse, and the Salty Sam Sea. And finally, step 6 of how to name places. Keep a list of cool things you hear or come up with in the shower. You never know when you're going to hear a cool name, and maybe it'll just pop into your head. But you will not remember it, so write it down. Next topic of discussion, let's talk about character names. Step 1, let's steal step 3 from above. Cultural appropriation. As much as you all want that singular, unique, badass name for your hero, let's remember the landscape. Without context, Conan, Hercules, Luke Skywalker, they all sound pretty lame rolling off the tongue. The story makes them famous, and yours will too. That said, you have to start somewhere, and, as discussed, most of you are not coming up with your own languages. Don't hesitate to borrow from existing cultures. Be respectful. Don't use it to make a joke out of anybody. It's a bag of tricks for quickly naming NPCs and background characters. Step 2. Cheesy fantasy names aren't all bad. I always stress that being a successful adventurer takes some branding. The first step in branding is a memorable name. So even if your mama named you John Smith, not all is lost. You can change your stars and go as something more interesting. Maybe something like Dearth. It's just like death, but with an R. This is where a study of pirate and wrestler names might come in handy. Braidbeard the Impaler, the Silver Sword of the East, or the Red Demon all spring to mind. I might have even dated one or two of those in my youth. Especially when dealing with minor characters, don't be afraid to get a little kooky, and don't hesitate to make fun of them within the story. Taserface got made fun of, and so will the Silver Sword of the East. Step 3. Know what your common names are. You might have the equivalent of slave names where unimaginative masters handed out simple names to immigrants, conquered peoples, and actual slaves. I use Mary a lot as a prole name, proles being a non-warrior and hence a second-class citizen in my protagonist culture. Usually, I throw a descriptor in, as in Blonde Mary or Tall Mary, but mostly I'm just making things easier on myself. I'm not a fan of the pronoun game, but sometimes confused identity can make a plot more interesting, and this is one way to do it. If superheroes can become besties over a couple of Marthas, you can have some fun too. Now what about all those other names? What can this apply to? Just about anything really. Unique monsters or animals, forces of nature, unique pieces of furniture, musical instruments. If it has a name, you can make it unique. Don't forget our mantra, keep it relatable, and don't rename everything. If you do give things made-up names, it doesn't hurt to have a mundane name too. In other words, the locals might call the big rodent a Woblo, but most of the time you're probably just going to refer to it as a giant rat. Alright, what are the steps? First, steal everything from above. Language crossovers, appropriation, cultural catchphrases. They'll all come back into play here. So what's the point? Why should you worry about unique names? Well, it adds color to your world. Silly or not, the Klingon Bat'leth is an icon of Star Trek. Sticking with sci-fi, you'll need names for all your pseudoscience. Hyperspace, second space, warp. Let's not forget to vent those port nacelles. That fixes everything. Second, stop venting. It really doesn't fix everything. I was just kidding about that. Weird terms stand out, and if you use them much, people will notice. Now, if that's okay with you, it's okay with me. I mean, memes are advertising too. But sticking to the don't overdo it theme, whenever you have something unique, you don't have to have a crazy name. In my fiction, the Weapons Yard is a focal point of the warrior's culture. I could have called it anything. The Good Button, or the Ring of Celestis, perhaps the Flurg. But Weapons Yard worked pretty good. I can mention it the first time out and not even have to explain what I'm talking about. Hence avoiding all the exposition needed to explain. All right, folks, it's exercise time. Let's put some of this newly discovered knowledge to work. Let's say we're dealing with a spread of land, predominantly grassy plains, with a relatively light population. Travel times are long, and horses play a big role in the culture. The dwarves in the east call the land Cal Banal, or Land of the Horse. The kingdoms of the north perverted that old term into Banalburn, but the locals know the land by their own native language, Shiela, and themselves, the Shai. Now, this isn't some organized effort to ignore outside influence. In fact, there's a river flowing out east. It's known by the dwarven name, the Dern. They often refer to their own northern lowlands as Vanisjern, or just the Yern, with the major city in that area being called Frederickburn. So what about the horses? These are common animals everywhere, but we want to make them special for this region. So we've already established the dwarven name is Banal, or something close to it. I don't really care what the northerners call them. To me, in my story, they're horses. Because whatever the common language is, it translates to us right over to English, or whatever your story is published in. So, how do we use unique names to add flair to our tale? Let's establish that we are going to distinguish in the story between basic types. We'll have war horses, draft horses, and sprinters. If I'm designing this for a game, I'll even mix up the stats. Sprinters, more speed, wars, more health, and make any strength adjustments I feel necessary for the drafts. Next, I'm going to decide to go a step further. I'll make an exceptional sprinter, specially bred, very expensive, and even faster. I'll do the same for 2 breeds of war horses. All these will be associated with distinct factions within the Shai. And finally, that leads us back to naming some stuff. Number 1, let's tie one back to the dwarven influence. Let's say it's raised by a faction near their lands. We'll call it the... Hold on. Caveat 1.1. I'm evoking rule number 3 from early in the introduction. Banal is bugging me. Definition of banal? So lacking in originality as to be obvious and boring. That's not good for what we're doing here, is it? It's not a commonly used word, but I just can't escape that definition. Alright, redo on number 1. Getting back to that dwarven influence, we'll call it the Bannic War. That is, now that Banal is replaced by Bannic. 1.2. So why didn't I just edit this all out? It sounds kind of crazy, doesn't it? I just could have named it the Bannic Burn to start with. Well, I want you to see the process. It's okay to make changes. But if we'd have skipped a decision, then we'd have never realized how much we hated it. 1.3. Does Bannic Burn sound too much like Bannic Burn? That'll make sense when you see the text. Maybe, and maybe not. It evokes thoughts of medieval battles for most. Well, most of the few who it evokes anything for. Except, of course, for those people who actually live there. Then it evokes all kinds of stuff. But, well, anyway, yeah, medieval battles. We're good with that. We're sticking with Bannockburn. Let's get back to number 1 for a little recap after all this chaos. All this has led us to one named breed, the Bannic Warpaint. Moving ahead to number 2. Thank you. Yes, I know, this is going to move along a lot quicker now. The term for our second war mount is morphed from the root of the native peoples. The Shelley is remarkable for its loyalty with the usual stories of horses defending their riders' corpses after falling in battle. Now number 3, we'll go straight to the sprinters, the Masho Quicks. The Masho because I just made it up, and the Quick to remind your audience what they are. It can really all just be that simple. Once you put effort into a few naming conventions, figure out your history, what people groups have been important, make up a few simple root names. Once you get that down, naming really becomes easy. Believe me, I didn't stress a single thing when I made up this episode. Hopefully, I've made things easier for you. There are a few other videos out there from talented world builders, and I encourage you to soak them all up and take what works for you. I appreciate the half hour or so that we've spent together today. You could have been doing anything, but you chose to hang out with me. Please do me one last favor. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and leave a comment. This station is young, and you can be a big part of the direction it takes. Where have I messed up? What topics would you like to see me cover in the future? Let me know. For now, I'm Lewis Nichols, and I hope you all have